Welcome back to my channel. This week's reading vlog is going to be reading outside of my comfort zone. Now, I am a big fantasy reader. I think my second most read genre is romance, which kind of means that I don't really get to much of anything else. I do enjoy the occasional historical fiction, the occasional thriller, the occasional sci-fi, but they're not genres I typically pick up often. So between my March TBR, which did not get completed, and then my April TBR, I have several books that fall in the category of Emily does not typically read these. So with that being said, I'm going to see how many of them I can get through this week. This is going to be our TBR. The first three books are my April picks, and the last two books are my March picks. So I'm going to attempt to get through my April reads first, and then see if I can circle back and clean up the ones I did not finish in the month of March. So our first pick is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is a book that my mom picked for me to read. I ask her every year to choose a classic for me to pick up because otherwise I would never probably get around to reading them. And this year she picked the modern-ish classic of Fahrenheit 451, and so it has made it onto our TBR. I think that I will likely end up reading it in this vlog just because it is significantly shorter than I thought it would be, so it'd be easy to get it read. And then we have No Exit by Taylor Adams, which is a book that was kind of sort of gifted to me by a good friend and is a thriller. And then we have The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a book that I'm very, very excited about. I've heard wonderful things, and is kind of almost a Groundhog Day sort of mystery is what it sounds like. So I cannot wait to get to this. It is a little bit chonky though. And then from our March TBR, I have left over Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie, which is a well-loved sci-fi, has won many an award. And then The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, which is an author that people seem to really like. They like her work, Tom Lake, and like that sort of thing. So I have a couple books by her, and I'm excited to read my first one. So that is our plan for this week. We shall see how much I get through. I'm kind of hoping 4, just because No Exit and Fahrenheit 451 are on the shorter side. And then The Dutch House I have via audiobook. So I'm kind of hoping that I can squeeze everything in. I'm guessing if one gets left out in the cold, it will probably be Ancillary Justice, but we shall see. So I will start my first read. I'm not sure what I'm going to go with first, but I'm sure you will see in the next clip, and I will check in with you when I am halfway through. It is time for our first check-in. As I'm sure you guys saw, I ended up picking up No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is a thriller. It is following Darby, who is a sophomore in college. She goes to, I believe, Colorado University, or University of Colorado, and she finds out just hours before the events of this book start that her mom has been diagnosed with cancer and is going into surgery in a hospital in Utah. And so she is trying to frantically make the drive home in order to be there for her mom's surgery, especially because they had quite a falling out prior to the events of this book, and she doesn't want like the last things that she said to her mom to be the last words she says to her mom. So she is crossing the Rockies, and a giant snowstorm comes through, and she ends up basically having to stop at a rest stop until further notice, until the plows come through, which is an estimated 8 to 10 hours. She has very little life left on her phone, and she is stuck with 4 strangers. And when she is kind of out and about trying to get cell service, She sees something very suspect in a van that is parked at the rest stop. There appears to be a child's hand gripping the like I guess wire to a kennel or something like that. And so Darby is now trying to figure out who the van belongs to, if that person is involved in whatever is happening here, what their purpose is, can she rescue this child? And of course, it is, high stakes because she is trapped in the same location as whoever this is, with no way to contact anybody, really no way to defend herself, trying to basically also rescue this child without alerting the kidnapper. So that is all I can really say on the plot of this book, because it's a thriller and I don't want to ruin it for you guys. I will say I'm kind of not loving the setting that this book is in. By necessity and by design, everything is happening in this rest stop. And it is basically kind of one long cabin building with bathrooms in the back. There's really not much interesting happening in the setting. And like I said, it's by design because they're all trapped there. But it is kind of boring, and it doesn't leave Darby a lot of wiggle room in the geography, which does add, higher stakes to this because she has very few options. But it is kind of not interesting. It's just the setting is not interesting. And then Darby herself is kind of an interesting character. She has the best of intentions, but is kind of disorganized and has a interesting fascination with death. She takes tombstone rubbings and has a whole collection of them. So she's not a main character that you kind of, at least for me, enjoy being in her head. So between that and the setting, this book is all right. It's not my favorite, but I am excited to get to the end and see how this plays out. So I will talk to you when I am done with this book. All right, I have finished No Exit by Taylor Adams. This is going to be a solidly 3-star book. It was decent. I'm not really a thriller girly, which is why we're here doing this video. So take that with a grain of salt. But I will say the ending of this book felt very realistic to what had happened. Even if it wasn't necessarily the happiest of endings. And, I love me a good happy ending. So that's the other reason I tend not to read these kinds of books, is because they don't always, end in a positive manner. But I almost feel that the ending was very appropriate. And then Taylor Adams backtracked in the last paragraph. So if you've read this book, then you understand what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, you need to read it to get it, and I'm sorry. I will say Darby, I know I said that she was not my favorite character, and that still holds, but I think that she definitely had some personal growth across the events of this book. She kind of acknowledges her faults and that she was kind of a rebellious teenager and a somewhat difficult child, and she had a difficult relationship with her mother. And initially, we kind of seemed to think that it was a two-way street. The blame is very much 50-50 between her and her mother. And then you kind of discover, as she admits to more and more, that maybe Darby was kind of the master orchestrator of the difficult relationship between her and her mother. So I'm not saying her mother was faultless by any means, but I do think that Darby held more of the blame for the strained relationship than her mother did. So, with that being said, first book of the video finished, a 3-star read. I think from here I am going to go into the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. The premise of this book, according to the back, is Evelyn Hardcastle will die every day until Aidan Bishop can identify her killer and break the cycle. But every time the day begins again, Aiden wakes up in the body of a different guest, and some of his hosts are more helpful than others. So, like I said, it seems to be kind of a Groundhog Day murder mystery, and I am excited to see where this goes. I do think the title might give us an idea of how often or how many days Aiden is reincarnated. We shall see. But I'm probably not going to start this book until tomorrow. It is late tonight and I have work in the morning. So I will check in with you probably tomorrow evening when I am midway through this book. All right, my friends, I have an update on the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I am having mixed feelings about this one. The premise and the plot is like very interesting to me. I was a little bit confused when we got started because I kind of felt like we got more information on the back cover than we get in like the first couple chapters. So it kind of, there was like a mismatch of information between what we know and what the main character knows when he wakes up in the body of his first host. And it was a little bit disorienting, but I'm struggling with like the pacing and the, like, I guess, voice of the main character. It's interesting. So, like I said earlier, the plot follows Aiden. He is assigned this task to figure out who kills Evelyn Hardcastle every day at 11 p.m. And every day he relives the same day that Evelyn dies in the body of a different host. And there are like a couple rules that surround it. Like he only gets shifted to a new host if his prior host passes out, but if his prior host has not finished the day, then he will end up back in the body of that host when they regain consciousness. So, if someone, for example, took an afternoon nap, then he would end up in the body of a future host only to revert when that host, gets knocked on the back of the head and passes out. And then he goes back to the one who was taking a nap. So it's a little bit like disjointed in that way, which is kind of intended, I think, to make Aiden's challenge a little bit more difficult. Aiden is also racing against other people to solve this mystery. But he's told that for some reason he volunteered to be there while everybody else is kind of there as a punishment. So it's a very interesting plot. I enjoy the setup of the book, but like I said, the pacing, I'm just struggling. It's like very much day in the life almost. I think that this is one of those books where this could come together very masterfully at the end. But in the meantime, it is just a real slog to get through it, to the point that I have pulled up the audiobook and I'm going to finish my last, I think, like 200 pages on audiobook because I'm struggling. So I will catch up with you when I have finished with this book. Hopefully the ending that ties everything together will make this all worth it. But like I said, I am just struggling a little bit with this one. So I will talk to you later, maybe this evening, maybe tomorrow evening, depends on, what I got going on. So I have officially finished the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and I am kind of undecided about how to rate it. Objectively, I think it's a very well-written book, and a very intricate mystery. But personally, I just didn't love it. I had issues with the pacing, as I said in the halfway check-in. The payoff of like all the pieces coming together, I felt like wasn't big enough for slogging through like 450 odd pages. And the main character was not like interesting to me. So our main character is Aiden, as I said in previous check-ins. He is inhabiting these host bodies to try and solve the mystery of Evelyn Hardcastle's death. He gets 8 hosts to try and figure this out, and if he doesn't, he has to start the cycle all over again. Like he loses his memories and all of that stuff. And we come to find out that he volunteered to be in this time loop Most people who end up in these time loops are criminals, and these are their punishments to try and solve these mysteries. And he chose to be there voluntarily in order to chase after somebody whose sentence he felt was not just. He wanted like a harsher punishment for them. And so he chose to follow them into the loop in order to try and kind of wreak his own vengeance, I suppose. So, by nature of the time loop, the further into the lineup of hosts Aiden gets, the more the host's personality kind of comes through. And he ends up inhabiting some less than stellar citizens of society. And so it's just interesting. I didn't like him to begin with, particularly. Like, I didn't hate him, but I wasn't invested. And then I also, sorry, I feel like I have a cat here or something. But I wasn't particularly invested in him as a character. And then, when he inhabited some unsavory people, I was even less invested. So between the fact that like I wasn't sold on our, storyteller, and then I didn't love the pacing, and then I felt like the payoff of the final mystery was not worth the slog, it just was not my favorite. So I know it is very well loved, and like I said, I can see why it is very well written, and very like conclusive. I didn't really notice any like plot holes or anything like that. It just was not for me personally. But the whole point of this vlog is that I try something new. So here we are. And with that being said, I think I said I was going to try and get 4 books done in this video. I think that's not going to happen at this point. There just is not enough time left before this video is supposed to go up. But this is what is left of our TBR, our tentative TBR for this video. And I honestly think I'm probably either going to pick up Fahrenheit 451 or The Dutch House. I tried picking up Ancillary Justice and was just not biting on it. And it is so like well loved and so critically acclaimed that I want to pick it up in the right mindset. So I'm going to hold off on that one. But I think I'm going to try one of these 2. So we will pass over to future me, and she will let you guys know what I decided to pick up. As I am sure you guys saw, I decided to go with The Dutch House by Ann Patchett for my next read. I am happy to report that I am enjoying this much more than the other 2 books in this video. Not that those books were bad, they just were kind of not my cup of tea, but this definitely is. This follows Danny Conroy and kind of the story of his childhood home. So his father made his money in real estate, and when he kind of finally made enough, he decided to purchase the titular Dutch House. And the Dutch House is an estate that was previously owned by a cigarette tycoon family. If you are kind of unfamiliar with the history, cigarette cartons were part of World War I soldiers' like care packages from home, or like the government funded packages to soldiers on the front lines. And that is how a lot of people ended up hooked on cigarettes back in the day. But they made their money with cigarette cartons. However, there ended up being no heir to pass the estate onto, and so the estate ended up with the bank. And then Danny's father, Cyril, ends up purchasing this house, and then this house kind of becomes the center of this family's woes. The first thing that happens is Danny and Maeve, which is Danny's older sister, their mother decides that the house is just too much for her. It is 3 stories, it is glass, it came with all of the physical belongings to the prior family, like their sheets and their dishes, and the ceiling is gilded and crown molding and the whole 9 yards. And Danny and Maeve's mother is a much simpler person. She is very into charity and, give the shirt off your back, support the poor. And so this house just doesn't align with her personal values. And she really struggles to live there. And she kind of comes and goes and comes and goes, and finally goes and never comes back. And then their dad seems to kind of attract their stepmother, Andrea, because of the house. Andrea seems to be interested in the house more so than Cyril. But Cyril, in kind of his loneliness after their mother leaves and kind of in the face of Andrea's persistence, decides to marry her, and she comes with 2 daughters. And Andrea is kind of the quintessential evil stepmother. And I'm kind of wondering if we are going to get kind of more of a perspective on like why she behaved the way she did. I don't know if we are kind of meant to take her behavior at face value from what Danny and Maeve are telling us, or if we're just getting Danny and Maeve's kind of version of events. So it's kind of wild. I do very much at this point in the book, I'm like a little over halfway despising Andrea for her behavior. She is very like dismissive of Maeve and Danny's needs. And, Maeve goes off to college, and Andrea suggests that one of her daughters moves into Maeve's room. And, it's rough. And when their dad passes away, Andrea kicks Danny out. At this point in the story, we're kind of at the point where Danny and Maeve have like grieved the loss of the house, but still feel like they have lost their inheritance to this person who has treated them very poorly, and whether or not they can get it back, and if they even want it back at this point. And Maeve has kind of had Danny go through as many higher levels of education as she can get for him, because they kind of the only inheritance they ended up getting from their father was an education trust, and Maeve's trying to essentially bleed it dry before Andrea can use it on her daughters. And since Maeve is not eligible for the education fund, Maeve is kind of using Danny to accomplish this. And Danny is kind of getting shoehorned into an education and a career path that he does not want. And it's very interesting. It's, a story of like human relationships and the complexity of like emotion and grief and just all of that. So I'm very interested to see where this goes and how this ends. This is very centric on the house. So I am wondering if the book will kind of end when ownership changes hands again, or where we're kind of going with this. But I'm going to go ahead and finish this book, and then I will let you know my final thoughts and feelings. And this will probably end up being the last book in this video, as I mentioned prior. I was kind of hoping to get Fahrenheit 451 into this video as well, because it is on the shorter side, but I am just running out of time. I thought I would have more time this week to read, and I just have not. So here we are. All right, my friends, I am here with a final reading update for this vlog. I have officially finished The Dutch House by Ann Patchett, and I am happy to report that I think this is going to be a 3.5-star read. I very much enjoyed it. I didn't want to rate it higher because I'm a little worried that my other 2 reads for the week are kind of skewing my perspective on how much I liked this book. So I'm going to sit on it, but I think it's going to be a 3.5-star read. As I said, this follows the Conroy family and kind of the breakdown of their familial relationships after the purchase of this estate. And I think that Danny, as a main character that we are following, I think that he very much learns from his mistakes, but I don't particularly love how he treated and talked about his wife. It was kind of very reminiscent of the relationship that his father had with his mother. And of course, we all know, as I said in my prior check-in, that relationship kind of broke down. And a big part of it was his dad not understanding his wife's needs. And I think that Danny definitely repeated history, which is hilarious because when he marries Celeste, he's like, she is the antithesis of my mother. Like, clearly this will work out. And it, of course, did not. And I think it's because he just didn't realize that you also have to work on your relationship. And then we encounter a very heartbreaking death in this book, or at least it was very heartbreaking to me. And that was a really, really sad note in the last 10% of this book. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I think that it was a really interesting examination of human compassion and empathy and grief. And there were parts that kind of made me want to scream and pull my hair out about how the characters were treating other characters. But at the end of the day, I think it's a very realistic portrayal of people in general. So with that being said, this was our tentative TBR for this video. And we ended up reading the bottom three, and Ancillary Justice and Fahrenheit 451 are going to have to go back into the pile in the hopes that they get read in another video. But this came off my March TBR and this came off my April TBR, so I am definitely hoping that I will finish these all soon. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to stick around for a while, please subscribe. Either way, I appreciate you joining me. Have a good one. Bye!